in this video, I'll be reviewing my Battle Mage build for an extreme difficulty run in the game GreedFall. So in this video, I'm going to review the gear that my Desarde has equipped, the skills that I chose for my build, where I allocated my attributes, and then finally the points I've spent into the talents. So let's get started. Alright, so first let's start off with the gear. I'm just going to quick show you the gear that I have equipped for my Desarde. I chose, just for a little bit of role-playing sake, to go with mage, like Inquisitor kind of equipment. So I got the Inquisitor Bishop specimens, which you can find out in the world. I believe it's closer to the end game. For my necklace, I have the Grand Chain of the Ordo Luminous. I'd really recommend getting to friendly status with Teer. Now I know, for different runs, and it can be challenging at times depending on like who of your companions that you're trying to romance or any of the factions that you're trying to stay on the good side. So, but I'd recommend definitely getting to friendly status with Teer, just because this is a reward for that. As you can see, it increases the stasis duration by 4 seconds, as well as it increases magic explosion damage by 45. So that's really, really powerful, and that's what's going to be helping us in our build today. Alright, we'll just move down to the Cardinal Ceremonial Robes, the gauntlets, the boots. I have on the Ring of Divine Fury, as well as for my melee weapon, it's the Hammer of the Forgotten God. And I don't typically use this too much, but it's always good to have a backup. So, okay, now let's move on to the skills. Alright, so I start off as a mage archetype, which granted my character the one-handed heavy weapons. So it just allows the use of a single-handed mace, hammer, or axe. It also came with the stasis ability, which is a magic ability that just freezes enemies in place, as well as the use of magic rings, which just allows you to equip and use various magic rings for another offensive ability. In all honesty, being a mage starts off kind of slow, but once you unlock some of the other magic abilities, then it really becomes a whole heck of a lot of fun. So, alright, so with the skills that I have, as you see, I have a lot of remaining points. I did seem to find a lot of the skill alters, so I mean the skills that you pick up, they seem to be overabundant, so you can really play around with the build, but this is just what I chose to do. So I did go and max out the one-handed heavy weapons tree. I decided not to keep going, because I don't have enough strength, as you'll see once I move to the attributes. I don't have enough strength to really utilize this too much, and we don't plan on being a melee-based character. So, it's always just good just to have a stronger secondary weapon. So I did also max out stasis, which stasis is going to be one of your bread and butters. Attacks that you're going to use, especially on one-on-one kind of encounters, just because it's a really strong crowd control ability. And then once you max it out, like all these different points, the final point in the tree helps with dealing just more damage. So you can see stasis makes immobilized enemies just more vulnerable to the next strike they receive. So you can get an increase of damage when an enemy is in stasis by an extra 50%. So that's awesome. I did pick up healing as well as a Shield of the Enlightened. So these are some really good defensive abilities and just survivability, but these can be of good use when you're playing through the campaign. However, I really just chose just to pick these up on a whim. I don't particularly use these, and you'll see that in my rotation, but do with it as you will. I sometimes would bring Ciora with me, and she has a healing ability, but I never really had to make use of these two abilities. Okay, so we'll move down to the next one. So Storm. So every one of the trees, Magic, Technician, and the Warrior, they have a, I guess you want to call it like an ultimate ability. So the ultimate ability for each of these uses your Fury meter. So once you have a maxed out Fury meter, you can actually use this ability. Okay, so this is an AoE stasis kind of move. Let's see the next point. Another good point about using Storm is that it makes enemies more vulnerable to magic damage. So this is a really good setup move, especially if you're outnumbered. You can just hit this, use all your Fury, use another magic ability, and they're going to take a heck of a lot more damage. And the second point, just the vulnerability to magic caused by storm just lasts a little bit longer. So, there's a little bit lingering effect for that. So it's just a great ability all around. But just keep in mind, you need to have a full fury meter to use this. Okay, so you can't just pop this willy-nilly. Okay, I did max out the Divine Ring. I do use this predominantly. I don't usually use Shadow Missile that much. I do use Shadow Impact, which is your heavy attack. So that would be Y on Xbox. That's triangle on PlayStation 4. It does a decent amount of damage, and also it increases the stun. It's also pretty good for combo speed, as you can see right there. So I really favor just using the ring, and also with the ring you can do a lightning dash, so it's kind of like a roll ability like that you have in between the warrior and technician tree. So it's just a good evasive ability just by double tapping A when you have the ring equipped as your primary. Allows faster, it costs less magic energy, so it's just good synergy for just the ring in general. So I would highly recommend picking this thing up. This definitely saved my ass a lot of times. So, all right, and then this ability, Shadow Burst. This is going to be your heaviest hitting ability. So this is a giant AoE, and it, as you can see right there, it does a heck of a lot of damage. So 855, it stuns enemies, has a decent area of effect once I maxed out the rest of the tree here. Okay, so I just, for the most part, as you can see, I stuck to just doing magic. I wanted to be almost a pure caster kind of build with the ability to have one-handed weapons just as a backup in case I need it. Okay, so all right, tell you what, let's move on to the attributes. As you can see, I have a shit ton of attributes, and I am level, I believe, 37, so I'm close to the end game. And playing on Extreme, I did level up very fast. All right, so immediately I decided to start putting points into willpower at the start of the game, just so I could start building up a large mana pool right away. I'd rather have much more mana to use my spells during combat in the beginning of my playthrough. Willpower increases your mana pool by 100 points. As you can see, that also increases your effect duration by 1 second. In short, it's just the more mana that you have available, the more you can cast without really worrying about running out in an encounter. I find that mana management, it was a little bit more challenging for me at the beginning because I usually always will play as a melee-based character in any kind of RPG, so this was definitely going outside my element. Okay, so with willpower, the only other thing I guess to note is the higher your willpower, it gives you the ability to equip higher quality amulets and necklaces. So like you saw in my neck, so this requires a willpower of 4, in order to have the magic regen as well as those passive boosts to my magic explosion damage as well as the stasis duration. So you definitely want to have a high willpower to equip decent amulets and necklaces. It definitely helps you out in the long run. Okay, so the second attribute that I ended up focusing on was just mental power. So this directly boosts your magic damage along with increasing your fury generation during combat. So similar to willpower, your mental power allows you to equip higher quality rings, which act as ranged projectiles as well as magic-based strikes during combat. So just using the light and heavy attacks. This will just increase their damage. For this build, I generally just focused on using my magic abilities, like I said, more than melee weapons. So that's why I ended up maxing out both of those trees. Okay, and then the last attribute that I focused on was just strength. I ended up putting 3 points into this. Now, I think if you play on normal or easy, you may only be able to allocate, I think, 2, maybe at max into this tree if you follow this. Like I said, you only need 2 for the weapon that I had, which was the Hammer of the Forgotten God. You just need 2 strength to use this. There's just going to be times where you may not manage your mana, effectively. That happened to me a lot in the beginning, at least. So it'll just leave you no choice just to pull out your hammer and smack the shit out of people. I also chose strength just because since I started off as the mage archetype, my class came with the one-handed heavy weapons line, so which requires strength. It's just might as well make use of the skills that you're already given from the beginning and not waste any kind of points. So, Now, I could have invested more points into, let's say, like endurance. I definitely could have done that just to be a little more beefy, but since this build is just great at crowd control and distance management, especially with like that dash ability that I was telling you about, you don't really need to worry about this attribute too much, granted that you don't, rush into each encounter willy-nilly. Okay, so don't be a knucklehead. Okay, so let's go on and just finish it out with the talents that I chose for this build. Hands down, for combat purposes, chemistry is an absolute must. It just is. It allows you to make some really powerful offensive and defensive potions and ability to, in addition, to being able to craft with far fewer ingredients from the materials that you collect or purchase while you're out on your travels on the island of Teer Fradee. The main potions that I had focused on in creating in my run through, which is health, magic potions, as well as like the fury and major fury potions, and you'll see why when I get into combat. So obviously, health and magic potions, those are, pretty obvious, just in case I don't manage my mana or, I get into a sticky situation. Whereas the fury potions are great for just quickly filling up that fury meter so I can use the storm ability that consume my fury and being able to take down large groups of enemies very quickly. So for the remaining talents you decide to invest in, that's just completely up to you. I focused on intuition just because, so I could gather more materials for crafting, as well as having a higher intuition, it unlocks certain dialogue options. And then there's also a couple parts in the world that you can use your intuition. I believe you have to have at least a level 2 intuition. That'll let you sneak through areas, like certain, like in caves or just like through walls. There were some hidden equipment items and just some hidden goodies that were just away, that really was just good to find. Really, it really just depends on the type of character that you want to build. Charisma, that's good for being a good diplomat and also able to being persuasive of others, along with boosting your teammates' combat efficiency, and it also lowers prices at merchant shops, so that's always a good one to have. Lockpicking, as you can see, I didn't put any points into it, but it does just as it says. It helps you pick locks and eventually not trigger traps that are set by enemies. I found that lockpicking, it was a good way just to make money on the side, since I ended up almost selling every damn thing that I would find in the locked chests. But that could just be my luck. I'm not quite sure if there's a lot of RNG, in the chests and such. But to be frank, I haven't really ran into a whole lot of traps in my time playing GreedFall, so I consider being able to bypass traps and just lockpicking to be kind of useless. Because usually some of the chests that you'll find that require a lockpick of 3, usually there's a key out there. You just got to go find the damn thing. So, all right. So another talent that in my first playthrough was really a lot of fun to use just for combat purposes, but I ultimately decided not to go for it, was craftsmanship. It's necessary for upgrading your gear and weapons, which is very handy, but I ended up foregoing craftsmanship, at least in the beginning of the game, and just simply going to the blacksmith, in New Serene, just to have him craft my upgrades. But that was for a pretty penny, let me tell you. So just in case you don't want to spend a shit ton of money at the blacksmith, definitely investing in craftsmanship and getting the materials for that, that's definitely a great way to go. Okay, so in terms of like my companion setup, I typically will take Kurt and Ciora and or Afra, just because Kurt's a pretty good tank, so he just keeps enemies occupied, and he does some pretty decent melee damage, granted that you equip your allies with decent gear and you don't neglect them. Ciora, like I said, she helps to heal the party, while Afra, I found she's just a really strong ranged ally. So as long as you're smart about how you upgrade your allies' gear and just how you watch how you engage your enemies, your allies, they shouldn't go down too much, during regular enemy engagements. Now there will be certain encounters that you'll have that, it's pretty tough that they may go down. That's why you have to really be smart about the actions that you take during combat as Desarde, because you don't have the ability to directly control them. So you really need to make sure that you're making the best decisions. Otherwise, you could die pretty quickly in this game. So, all right, tell you what, let's see this in action. Okay.
Ready to excite the crowd.
All right, so let's just go ahead and we're going to see this build in action. So let's go ahead. We're going to fight a large group of enemies. Just so that way you can see the large crowd control and AoE damage that this build is capable of. And then we're actually going to go against a single boss enemy, one of the guardians in the coin arena down here. So let's do the large group first. Just to verify with the game, I am on extreme. Okay, so I'm not pulling your leg. And we're going to be bringing Afra and Kurt with us. But before we jump in, so it looks like we don't have a full Fury meter. So with that being said, you can either pop the Fury potion that maybe you have crafted, you know, just that way you can start right off the bat and not have to wait to use the Storm ability. But you know what? We're going to do that. We're definitely going to do that. So let's dash in. And I already got struck by the knucklehead. Let's use burst. Storm. Okay. Stunned everybody. And then now we can just finish off the stragglers. So just like that, you know, it's pretty powerful, this build. You know, I did mess up at least initially in the beginning, but as long as you're smart about, you know, your setups and trying to hit all the enemies with your AoE type attacks or your AoE crowd control abilities like Storm, you know, you're gonna make short work of them. Okay, so we'll move on, and we're gonna go against a single boss, one of the guardians, like I said, and now it's mana management is going to be paramount here. Okay, just because these enemies, obviously they're not gonna go down as quickly as those, you know, soldiers did. So being able to manage your resources and making best use of your damage output, you know, that's just gonna help you beat bosses quite easily in GreedFall, regardless of the difficulty. So let's go ahead and jump in. Alright, so we're going to use stasis just because it will do more damage when they're in stasis for our next attack. Against large, like the bosses that you go against in GreedFall, I don't always recommend using the Storm ability, just because you know, the follow-up that I typically do is always the Shadow Burst, and that uses, like you just saw there, that uses a lot of mana. And I don't want to, you know, run out of my resources. So that's why I'll sometimes use the Fury ability for my magic ring equipped, which, as you can see, it just shoots out a magical projectile. It is unblockable. It does a decent amount of damage. It's nothing that's really, you know, gonna hit too hard, but still, it'll allow you to generate your mana instead of having to solely use it for, you know, the storm purposes. So 720, that's not too bad, you know. Could be more, but you know, it's gonna have to be a war of attrition right now. Stun him, shadow impact, and almost die. As you can see. See, if you're not smart, yeah, you would go down. That's gonna happen. This guy. He's attacking us instead of Afra. Sorry, Afra, you took one for the team. Whatever. Man, that shadow dash. It's super helpful. You know, as you see, it helped me to evade and just not take damage. So we're just gonna machine gun. Okay. Well, alright, as you can see, it's, you know, this build is pretty powerful against a group of enemies or against a boss. You just, like I said, you just need to be smart about how you manage your resources. Distance as well is definitely key, because this build is not meant to
straight up tank damage. So overall, playing as a mage, it was a hell of a lot of fun. In the beginning, it was a little bit more challenging, just because you didn't have, as high of a mana pool, and you didn't have any of these hard-hitting abilities that really have a good synergy with one another. But, probably out of my 2 playthroughs between the technician, like the gunslinger build that I put out, as well as like the mage run through, the mage has been my absolute favorite. So I really appreciate you guys watching. My name is Chop Celery. I'll be putting out videos like this probably in the future with other games that I'll play, just for entertainment purposes. Hopefully I can help some of you in making your GreedFall adventure just a little bit more fun. But I appreciate you all watching. All right, take care. Bye-bye.